I use the winter months to repot some of my trees. I do light root work, particularly on healthy trees, and I do repositioning and slight wiring just to make sure trees are ready to go. This of course I do in periods that there's no frost, and if frost is coming I keep junipers like this one that I just repotted and just repositioned out of the strong frost. But in winter, even though the trees are dormant, this is work that can be done, and certainly if you have a lot of trees, sometimes you have to do this. This is Jelle, and I was just working on this juniper when I thought, let's bring in the camera, because now I'm doing something which might actually be interesting. This juniper is a cutting that I grew over the last year or so from a bigger tree. The branch had one side root, I potted it up and left it for the year. This wonderful Itagana has side roots here on this side branch of the main trunk. So that's going to be a massive cutting. Let's see whether that will stay alive as well. That's another plant. So when potting these up, always check whether there's more roots. This is of course not as I want it to be. So we can cut this as well. It was strangled in. Look at that. That's just a side branch that had hit the ground and then also rooted. Now I have an extra plant. No need to do anything to this cutting right now. It's just planting it up, getting it to root. Next spring, if it is growing well, we might consider something else, or maybe a year after. Now it's aiming at recovery, setting it up for growth. There we go. Now it was still very unstable in the pot, so I decided to put it out of the pot earlier today, and then I started clipping off the roots, and then I realized this is something that you might want to see. Now let me take this substrate off and I'll show you what was so interesting. Look, here are all the roots that I just clipped off. And that in itself is not so interesting. But look, you can see here these roots, they had very little side roots here, and then there's a whole bunch of roots, right? And the same for these. They're not all that interesting, these roots. And they were all hanging here from that point, that point. So there was a whole bunch of long roots attached, just like this. This is why it was not all that stable in the pot, and I decided, let's cut these off. Furthermore, you can see here, this is a part of an old branch. This is the original first root that grew. It got a lot stronger, and now it's strong enough to support the tree, but so the tree cannot stand like this, it will need to stand like this. Now, fortunately, if I start looking at these roots, there are actually a number of roots here in this cluster. Look at that. This is one root, there's another root here, and there's a third root here in the back. And I can plant these up like this. That way it will become a stable tree again. That means that this branch that was the original main trunk will become a side branch, and this will become the main branch. So what I can do at this point is I'm going to spread these out and plant it up, but I'm also going to wire these main trunks out and plant it up in a pot. This of course I'm not going to keep. This is 2.5 millimeters I think of aluminium wire, and I might need 2 of these, but that's not a problem because this has 2 branches. This is one branch with a side branch and a continuation. I'm going to wire all 4 of these out. How much do I need? Enough to reach that part, then around this V shape, and then up there. Roughly this much. As always, just 1 or 2 loops around one of the branches is enough to anchor it, just like this. And now I can wire out the other side completely, just like that. Note, I'm not doing any pruning at this point, I'm not cleaning it out much. I'm just putting this wire on. And I said this was going to go around and onto this side branch. I'm very sorry. In the shed, filming is always a little bit awkward because I don't have a lot of space here. I hope you can still see what I'm doing. and my fingers are cold. It's only a few degrees above freezing. So I'm going to have to use pliers to help the wire. And here now I can also wire out the rest of this branch, making sure I'd grab one side branch now and the other one in a minute. Just like that, tick tick. Now if you apply more than one wire, make sure that you apply them in a parallel fashion. That way they won't cross, reducing the pressure points on the tree. Let's get this on there. So just like that. The wire follows the same route, the same path along the trunk as the first wire did. You can put them straight next to each other, so flush against each other. I prefer not to. This way it is easier to cut off the wire later on. Now it's important to realize it is winter, and in winter juniper loses some of its pliability. So I'm not making any very intense curves or bends on this tree at this time of year. This is just a little slight adjustments. I was going to plant it up like this, I said, so this needs to become the main leader. This needs to very clearly go down. And then this can be a branch that goes down all the way, and this can then come back up and join the party. And then this one I want to have in this space. Of course this tree is going to be growing for a long time after this. So it's not and therefore it's not all that important how big it is. And therefore it's not all that important what shape it gets. I'm just removing a few of these branches here, not to aid the roots, but really to make sure that this becomes the main tree and therefore is taller and heavier. Something like this. Now I can plant it up with the roots spread out. For this I'm using the original pot that it was growing in because it was doing okay. And I'm going to use an anchor through the bottom of the pot. So the wire now sits at a curve here at the bottom, holding this wire up, and this I can now use to secure the tree in the pot. I'm going to mount the substrate, pushing the sides down and towards the center so that this really is a high mount, because I want these roots to come over it. This was going to be the position. So let me just move this up. If I want to position it like this, then this root needs to go to the back. This comes to the front. And then the other one in the back needs to go out as well. And this needs to stay in place. Now I can gently wire the wire around the trunk here. And it is completely stable in the pot. This is not optimal, but it will secure it in the pot for the time being. Now it's just a matter of filling it up with substrate and letting it grow for a season. Naturally, these are nice and healthy whips, and if you want, you can propagate these basically by just popping them in the pot, in the substrate, and waiting for spring. I prefer to not use heel cuttings. I find cut cuttings are a lot quicker to root, but you can use larger, especially in fall. I find these may root still this spring and therefore survive summer. Now this is a nice big cutting. All set for spring.